All right, for the last section here, we'd like to get into kind of the tools and the training and the resources that you need to be a writer. You've already talked about your process where you walk around with a dictaphone and so on. Is there any software that you use regularly that kind of puts you in the mode as well when you're writing?
I have heard about some programs, but I've never used any of them, and so I'm not really familiar with any of them. Just I've heard that they exist for ways of developing character and things like this. Mm-hmm. But my advice, and people should get a lot of advice on this, because you know what, maybe there are some fantastic Pulitzer Prize winning novelists out there who will say, oh yes, I completely rely on novel creation software for fleshing out all my characters. So in which case I would say, look, what do I know? But I don't really think that the novel lends itself to a software approach. Screenwriting does to some extent, because the form of a screenplay is so defined by industry standards that if you really want to boldface or use all caps or indent just so much or keep writing X day, Rapungi, whatever, you could do it, but it would, and people once did, but it would be laborious. So if you write a screenplay, definitely get a screenwriting program that'll automate all that stuff, but that's just the form. The content, you really have to figure out yourself. And so I imagine that what these programs will do is maybe help you focus on things that I can teach you in 10 seconds, which is when you're trying to figure out anything in the story, particularly your characters, it's just those 6 questions. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. That's it. Ask those questions again and again and again, and whatever answers you get, subject those answers to the questions. Ask yourself about your characters. What motivates your characters? What are they afraid of? What do they want? What are their desires? What do they think are their desires? What are really their desires? Where did they come from? What were their formative experiences? What created their worldviews? This is really all there is to it. And I think maybe I'd be a much better writer if I used one of those programs, but I sort of doubt it. I think that most people who go in for those sorts of programs tell themselves that they're doing it because it's going to help them get the novel written, but in fact they're doing it as a distraction. And I know this because I'm a student of Japanese. I've been studying the language for a long time, and I can speak reasonably good Japanese at this point. But I know there are many times where you don't feel like doing the hard, boring work of the drills. You don't want to take out the tape recorder and run through the drills. Say, I'll go to Kinokuniya, maybe there's a book that'll help me or something like that. And you spend 2 hours at Kinokuniya, and it's not that the book is bad. And maybe eventually you'll get it, you might even use it a little bit, but that expedition was really about avoiding what you needed to do.
Oh, good point.
And I think a lot of people do that instead of, look, do you want to write a novel? You know what you have to do? You have to sit your butt down and write the novel. Yes, you have to take some walks and figure things out, and you have to read a lot during your whole life. And by the way, you should also read as a writer. This is also important advice. That means don't just read for pleasure. Read for pleasure. That's great. That's important. But then if there's a book that you think is fantastic, or a passage that you think is great, anything, great dialogue, great action, great sex scene, whatever makes you think, wow, this is my kind of book, my kind of scene, read it and ask yourself, what is the writer doing that's working so well here? Because behind the writer's art is technique, is craft. And if you pay attention, you can spot the craft, and when you can spot the craft and describe it, you are well on your way to greater conscious control, conscious mastery of the craft, which is what you need to enable yourself to express yourself as an artist. So these are the important things to do if you want to be a writer. You got to read and you got to write. The rest of it is at best, and there are a lot of good how-to books. Many of them I recommend on my website. Don't overdo it though. Don't let the how-to books, like the software programs, become an excuse for not doing what you really need to do, which is write the book. So always keep that in mind. Ask yourself, am I doing this because this is really going to help me get this novel written, or am I doing it because writing is hard work? Not hard like digging a ditch, but it's hard mental work, and your mind wants to do 1,000 other things. And if you offer up a rationalization, the drawers will get cleaned, the lawn will get mowed, you'll buy some new good books, you'll do some research, an hour, a couple hours on software programs that purport to help you become a better writer.
Everything but the story.
Real, but exactly. Yeah. So the main thing is to write.
Okay. So if you use a dictaphone, do you also sometimes use like speech recognition software?
No. Although I can be pretty opinionated, sometimes too opinionated. Whatever works is the thing you should do. I don't outline very much, but I would never tell someone don't outline. That's foolish. James Ellroy writes 300-page outlines, and his books are genius. Works of genius. So, what am I going to do? Say that James Ellroy's method is bad? It works for him. Use the method that works for you. This is true for all these things, even software programs. I don't know.
Okay.
And as far as the dictaphone and things like that, dictaphone works for me because it just saves me a little time. I used to take notes, but it's sort of hard. I like to walk when I'm thinking.
Right.
So it's just not impossible, but pulling out the pad and writing, it's fairly illegible. It takes less time to just speak into a dictaphone. Speech recognition software I know has gotten pretty good, and probably that would be a good tool, but I find that at this point I don't know if it's a trained response or an innate thing, but just the process of working the keyboard, I think actually there's some sort of feedback going where, yes, my thoughts, the reason I'm working at the keyboard is because I'm trying to reproduce my thoughts on the screen, ultimately on the page. But biofeedback's a weird thing, and when over time, when you do a process where every time you're creative and you're thinking you're doing this thing, pretty soon when you're doing that thing, it's, I guess, a bit Pavlovian maybe, or some sort of operant condition or whatever. So I wouldn't want to give up the writing part of things. That would be, in fact, a little interesting proof of this recently. I was taking a Japanese lesson, and the teacher asked me how to spell a word in English, and I'm actually a good speller, which is nothing to be proud of because who really cares, but I am. And I was embarrassed that for that moment I couldn't think of how to spell the word, and I said, wait a second, and I started moving my fingers, and then I was able to remember it. Yeah. So that's interesting, right? Why would you have to move your fingers? Yeah. But this is what I'm talking about. So for me, working the keyboard is wonderful. Now there are terrific writers out there. Pulitzer Prize winner Richard Russo, Empire Falls. God, what a book! He writes longhand in spiral notebooks, and someone else types them up for him. That works for him. Do whatever works. Speech recognition wouldn't work for me. It would be too laborious. I like to manipulate things directly on the screen with my own hands.
Okay. Now, from what I've seen, you have quite a lot of contact with other writers, especially in the thriller genre.
Right.
And I was wondering, what kinds of events do you go to, and how do you get together, and what's the value of it to you?
Those are really good questions, and on every one of these subjects is more on my website in the For Writers section of my website. So anything that we're talking about today that you think is interesting and worthwhile, stop by the website and you can find more. What kinds of conferences and things like that do I go to? Primarily crime and mystery and thriller conventions. And this is one of the things I figured out after the first book. I mean, I just wasn't really aware or even thinking about the fact that there's a whole infrastructure out there for writers like me. I mean, what's a convention? It's a group of people who want to buy your product, basically, or who are amenable to buying your product, who are willing to hear your pitch, and so are much likelier than the average person to be interested enough to actually go out and buy whatever it is you're selling. That's what a book convention is. And the whole whatever thriller, crime, mystery, suspense, that under that whole, usually it's called mystery as the high level umbrella category. If you go to a convention, you've got, first of all, readers, fans, who they want to meet you. I mean, they're there to learn about new mysteries. If you're new, no one's heard of you, and this is a challenge. So I've written a book. I know it's a damn good book, but nobody's heard of it. If nobody's heard of a product, they're not going to be able to buy it. So, okay, how can I reach these people? Well, there are about 2,000 of them at BoucherCon, for example, or something close to that number at Thriller Fest, one of the newer conferences, and a really good one too that's held annually in New York City.
You just went to Romance Times?
I was that's a new demographic for me. Yeah, I was just at Romantic Times in Orlando. That's my second Romantic Times, and it was fantastic. And there's another similar one called, different in certain ways, but same demographic, Romance Writers of America. Those are the two big ones, RT and RWA, in romance. And then in mystery, there's BoucherCon and Left Coast Crime and Sleuth Fest and Murder in the Midlands and Thriller Fest I mentioned already, and I'm leaving out a few off the top of my head. They're just not coming. But the point is that there's a huge market out there of, let's just say, readers. But that's just readers. Yeah. There are all sorts of players in this ecosystem, as there are in any business ecosystem. There are reviewers and booksellers, bloggers. So if you go to a convention, you meet these people. If they get to know you, then this is, choose your metaphor, it's low-hanging fruit, or it's a stepping stone on your way to that mass market that's on the other side of the broad river you're trying to cross, or it's the innermost or relatively inner circle among a series of concentric circles you're trying to get to.